You're listening to Hackers to Founders with Chris Magistrato.
Weirdly, at both of those times, sort of in different ways, like I both felt, I was like, I really love building stuff, and I really love, honestly, coding, writing software. But I kind of like this entrepreneurship side of like, even like my tiny small businesses are like selling like tie-dye t-shirts. It was really fun to just sort of like build something that people like and get that, like, it's a bit creative, but it's also some really fun exploration. So I think I was about 12 when I sort of had this idea where I was like, someday I want to start a tech company. I think at the time I was like, someday I want to start a company like Google. And then, life happens and a bunch of stuff happened in between.
This is Hackers to Founders, a podcast about cybersecurity professionals who have reached the pinnacle of their cybersecurity expertise and have ventured into new frontiers, whether it's launching innovative startups or making impactful investments in our industry. My name is Chris Magistrato, and I'm a vulnerability researcher best known for traveling and meeting hackers from all around the world. And I'm using what little extrovert skills I have to introduce to you hackers that are changing the world.
And welcome to another episode of Hackers to Founders. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce to you a truly inspiring guest whose career embodies the seamless fusion of deep technical expertise and entrepreneur spirit. Our guest, Zara Perumal, is the CTO and co-founder of Overwatch Data, a company at the cutting edge of using machine learning to transform raw OSINT data into actionable business intelligence. At Overwatch Data, Zara and her team analyze streams for news, social media, and the dark web, and even natural disasters, providing users with critical insights that empower them to make informed decisions in real time. Before launching Overwatch Data, Zara honed her craft as a software engineer in Google's threat analysis group, where she worked on pioneering solutions to safeguard digital infrastructures. Her impressive journey also includes impactful research at MIT CSAILs, contributes at Harvard's Belfer Center on defending digital democracy, and a rich history in software and data analytics. From her early days as an iOS app developer, spans academia and industry, reflecting a deep commitment to innovation in cybersecurity and data science. Whether she's improving malware detection systems or developing new methods for threat analysis, she continually pushes the envelope in tech, making her an ideal guest for our discussion today. Zara, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Super excited to chat today.
And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps. And if you're on Spotify, please give us 5 stars. Thanks.
Yeah, great to have you as well. Would love to hear more about, your journey, specifically like starting as far back as, when you were as a child growing up and stuff like that. And like, as you moved and were growing, like, are there any stories or things that led you towards this more entrepreneur journey or even tech in general? And like, what were your thoughts and thinking about what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yeah, sure. I think that I have so many stories related to this. I think kind of at an early age, so I always liked math and science. And my dad was a software developer. He was in computer science. And so he tried to force, I think, me and my brothers to see, like, if any of us are interested in this. And I really was. I took I think my first HTML class when I was around 11. And I absolutely loved it. I thought it was so fun. You could just build stuff. And so I got really interested in that and ended up taking some more computer science classes and became an early iPhone developer. So I was learning to code right around when the iPhone launched. And so I made some mobile apps. And I think that's actually when I first sort of fell in love with tech and computer science, because I just thought it was so fun. You can just like dream up ideas and you just build them and ship them off to people. And also around that time, that's the first time I sort of got exposed to entrepreneurship in a few, like all sorts of different ways. I think me and my best friend who lived in the neighborhood, we would like go around and we'd make pillows or CDs or tie-dye t-shirts, and we'd start selling them to our neighbors. I started selling the mobile app development business. I would like be a contract app developer. Weirdly, at both of those times, sort of in different ways, like I both felt, I was like, I really love building stuff, and I really love, honestly, coding, writing software. But I kind of like this entrepreneurship side of like, even like my tiny small businesses are like selling like tie-dye t-shirts. It was really fun to just sort of like build something that people like and get that, like, it's a bit creative, but it's also a really fun exploration. So I think I was about 12 when I sort of had this idea where I was like, someday I want to start a tech company. I think at the time I was like, someday I want to start a company like Google. And then, life happens and a bunch of stuff happened in between.
Yeah. Beautiful. So you mentioned like contracting for mobile apps. Were you a contractor building out these mobile apps, or you had a group of people that you guys were building applications? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, that's what, honestly, I should have built my own. I built a few for fun, like things like Tetris, but mostly I would find various people who wanted an app built for them. So I think one was around like a storytelling app for like children. And so I would usually build the app for other people, and my business is more on the consulting side of like, well, tell me what you want and I'll build the app.
Nice. How did you find clients for those things? Was it like word of mouth and like other people that like, oh, I think I'd like this app, and then you help them build it out, or was it like really like we want to find like some really really great application customers and clients like pitting marketing? Like what was that? What did it look like for
Oh,
you?
yeah. Oh, it was nothing that serious. Yeah, it was very much word of mouth. I found a few clients to help support there, and I think at first it was I think like I don't know, friends of family who was I told them I was building applications, and they're like, oh, I want one, can I? And it was kind of new, so I think that also helped a lot as a younger entrant in the space. When there's not as many people doing it, it was easier to get started there. And then I think over time, I kind of continued to do it even through college, just so as like a good way to make money, well, pay for college and that kind of thing. But yeah, it was never something that like I did scaled marketing or actually even was that intentional about like the outreach on that.
Got it. What language were you using to program the apps at the time? Was it Objective C or Swift, or I don't know
Yeah,
exactly which
I
one?
started with Objective C and then moved to Swift, and then I seem to have bailed out of that space before things like React Native got fully used.
Okay, I got it. Yeah, and I think like Flutter's being used now, and you can like write in that, and like it develops for both Android as well as iOS. I don't know.
Yeah, the current state of things, it seems so much better. It's also like so much more beautiful. And that's, I think, one of the things I really liked building these apps, but I also realized I'm not the best at like front end or UX design. So it was, I had a lot of fun building it, but now you see like, I don't know, the modern way of doing it just blows what I was doing away.
Yeah, yeah. And then for even like websites when you're doing HTML, we're using like Dreamweaver or something else.
So at the time I wasn't doing very many websites. Actually, I didn't get into web development. Really avoided it until like maybe college or after college, and then did a mix of things like a lot of React or Angular type stuff.
Angular, Jesus, I still hate Angular. I've only done React, and even that, I'm just like, I just hate front end so much. Like it's just so string. I don't know. I think if you know how to do it and you do it right and it looks good, you can do it right. But it's a bit different. I don't know. I like it.
100%. I'm a back end developer who I know enough to do like mediocre things on the front end, but I'm lucky to work with people who are absolutely magical at that and now do it to a level that I have no no dreams of doing.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So like I want to hear also I want to hear more about some of the work that you did at MIT, and like what was your what kind of things were you experiencing there that have led you down the road where you are today?
Yeah, well, it's funny, like when I look back, and maybe still, like I have a lot of things that I'm interested in, and I get excited about things really quickly. So I think that's one of the things that really stood out about college is I was so excited to go there, and I was like, there's all these things I'm interested in doing, and I did not do well at curation. I just like signed up for everything I could find, and I think I was also trying to figure out like which in this like broad range of tech or computer science or biotech, like what are the things that I actually want to do, and how do you pick something when you can work in so many fields, which I think is kind of the blessing and the curse of working in computer science is like, the applications are really endless. So I started off, I was actually majoring in bioinformatics initially, and did some more lab work, looking at like understanding how genetics impacts the expression of genes, and then I worked in a few other fields. One of them was working in urban gardening. I worked on some projects, like had some internships in big tech, and I think I was really just at the time like just trying to figure out like they call it at MIT, they're like drink from the fire hose and try to figure out like you have all these options. How do you just like see what resonates with you? And I think that's for me like what I found was a few things. I really like buildings, and I'm not the best at research. So like long-term things where you have to like wait a year or a year and a half to see if your idea is going in the right direction. Or even things like lab experiments in biology where you do the experiment, you set it up, and you have to wait long periods of time to see if you're going on the right track. That I don't love. I love things where you can like test them early. And so I was like maybe not a PhD, maybe more of a startup. But then I think the other like big inflection point for me is I was kind of, I was more in this like mobile app space. Then I did bioinformatics. Then I was like getting more into machine learning. And then my senior spring, I took a cybersecurity class with Ron Rivest, and it just changed my life, where I never thought about that being something I wanted to do or even like could do. Like I always thought it was kind of too hard, and he just made it feel so accessible and was so welcoming, and like it just also was such a fun field of like, you get better and the attackers get better, and so there's always a new problem. And because I have sort of that like I always want the new problem because I get bored easily, I was like, this is incredible. How do I get into this field? And so then I spent my master's and I was able to work with Kalyan and Lids to do like active learning for malware detection, which sort of was the beautiful combination of some of the skills I had with some of the applications that I wanted to work in. And that's sort of how I transitioned. Of like the first transition was just like, I want to go from building like traditional software to finding a way to work in cybersecurity.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about the malware analysis side of stuff. So at the time I was working at, I think around like 2016, 2017, I was working at Georgia Tech's Institute of Information Security and Privacy with some of the researchers that were doing like large scale malware analysis. And they worked with GTIS to like bring in like 800,000 samples a day or something like this, something astronomical. And they would leverage machine learning for some of this, some of the work they were doing. So what kind of some of the research that you were doing around malware at the time?
Yeah, it's funny because it's all ancient at this point in time.
Yeah, probably now, yeah.
What we were working on is there's a paper is like right before I did my master's, and it was a 1-year program, so you kind of do something quickly.
Wow. Okay.
You can land. But one of the things we were doing there was the PDF. So we're looking at PDF and document-based malware, and there's some work that was showing how you could, I forgot the name of the paper, but they basically showed how you could adversarially evade static detection. And there's some people who would build like very like maybe simple like kind of signals-based models for PDF detection. Like what are the tags? Does it use Flash? Does it use JavaScript? And so they build
use Flash, yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
It's like very like and like looking for specific objects, and so it's kind of like and it is like a pretty good like generic classifier of like yeah. Generally, if you have other stuff like if they have scripts in it, much more sketchy. But they like don't have the most accuracy, and you could also easily like evade these models. And so we were trying to look at this question of given that you have static analysis, dynamic analysis, and then human analyst. Can you basically be more strategic about when you use dynamic analysis? And then can you use that to improve the static models to be like, well, you missed this obvious thing. And then similarly, like, because you have humans in the loop, can you use the humans to improve the dynamic analysis, improve the static analysis? So that was basically the thesis of like, you don't have time to send humans after everything. How do we kind of transfer that learning down to the static models?
How did that go?
It was good. I think we found some interesting results there. And then it was interesting. I moved on and kind of later in my career, I worked at Google and I had this 20% project on some like working kind of in a similar space of like, how do we understand Office docs and PDFs? And so it was kind of fun to see like sort of stay along. I still have an interest in PDF and document maldocs and document-based malware. I find it interesting. But yeah, I think it was also, an interesting principle to think about that at that stage. And it sort of impacted how we think about some things at Overwatch of when like how do you think about like these resource optimization problems where like there's so many problems in security that yeah, if you threw infinite resources at it you could detect something crazy about it, but how do you think about doing that at scale and doing it with finite resources?
Yeah, we can jump into Overwatch in a second, but I want to bring up some of the research I'm currently doing with. So I have a presentation with Corellium coming up the little end of this month. And I'm like utilizing their platform for malware research on mobile applications right now. And like I think it was like last like 2-3 months ago. Now the malware authors are like corrupting the headers for the APKs themselves. So like when you open up Nginx to reverse engineer, it says like, oh, can't do this. It's corrupted. But then if you throw it in like Corellium immediately, it'll run and it's fine. So I'm like writing some script. I'm like, I know we can just like, you can throw this in and it'll fix the corrupted part. It's like, so I'm trying to like write that out so I can present on it just to have a clear thing. But it's very interesting. Like that they're creating, like some threat actors will create specific types of tools to like slow down analysis. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's interesting, but I always like the back and forth, just as you're expressing. Yeah.
I'm like definitely want to see your presentation. Let me know when it's published because I think it's a super interesting part of this. Like you're seeing like, the anti-detect get slightly smarter of like for web pages that are like, oh yeah, this is obviously a security researcher like trying to like bot all of these pages and see if they're phishing. But I think that's a really fun game where like the tools get slightly better for both. Where you're like, well, now it's easier to have some like smarter code unpacking, like simplification, but it's also easier to obfuscate. So I find that.
Yes, it's the first time I'm like on the other, like it's the first time I'm looking at it from like, okay, that the malware authors did this to slow it down, and I'm just like, this can't take, like in my head I'm like, this can't take that long to like write a script to like bypass, like get around their thing or whatever, right? So like I'm just trying to write it and then I'll just share it with everybody. All right, so they did this, but I did this. So whatever the case is, there was on Reddit, there's for like some of the large like subreddits and stuff where they have a lot of people posting images, they'll implement like a bot or two to take the image, and then what they'll do is they'll like if someone uploads an image, they'll take it, they'll hash the MD5 of it, and then check to see in their little local database to see if this image has been uploaded before, because they don't want duplicates on their subreddit, and they'll remove it. So I found the bot that they utilized. It's called like Magic Eye or something like this. It's like it's open source. It's on GitHub. So I went on there. I copied the code that was utilized to determine like how they take everything, and I gave it a ChatGPT, and I was like, hey, write a bypass for this, and then so it did, and I published it and it worked and stuff. I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, it's very exciting to see like, how quickly it's just things are going to be changing back and forth and stuff like that, especially as like different types of models are increasing. So
no, I absolutely love that part. Like, I feel like right now, like, it honestly feels like the early days of the internet where it's like things are just changing so fast, where you're like, the problem I couldn't solve 6 months ago, now I can, but now there's a new problem that's like exploding. So
it's exciting and terrifying. I think like we're especially, I mean, as of most recent, right? DeepSeek being open source or saying it's open source, and everyone's like, well, it's China, and like, is it being sent back and like all of this stuff, and it's just, yeah, it is like the wild west in terms of these things, especially for the AI creations. It's like, who's managing the data, where's the data located and stuff. So
yeah,
and what insights are being ran, but.
Yeah, and like, what's the trustworthiness? Yeah, it's 100%. I feel like depend on the day, like it's terrifying or it's like super exciting.
So okay, I would so now like I want to hear about your company at Overwatch and stuff like that. But before we even jump into the company, I'd like to know what came up with how did you guys come up with the idea? How did you find your co-founder? You're working at Google, and then at that time where you're like, I have this idea, or like, how did this happen?
Yeah, it's funny because I honestly, my co-founder Arjun had the idea initially. It's interesting because I was something where I was like, I always wanted to go into startups, and I think I even originally I set out to like work at Google, and I was like, I'm just gonna work there for like a year or two, and then I'm gonna go work in startups. And then I found an amazing team, and it was like one of those things where I was like, this is so good, it's such an impactful mission what we're working on, and I just loved it. And so I honestly sort of stayed longer than I intended to, but I always like I said, like since I was a kid, I wanted to start a startup, and I think I tried some different, like I worked on a kind of a startup project in college, and I worked on a couple different things, and I'd realized like some attributes of like what I was looking for in a startup, but I hadn't had that like magical idea where I was like, oh, this is the thing I should solve with the people I should solve it with. And so I was sort of thinking about, like, I think some of the things that are important for me is like, I think the mission really matters. I think like for me, I work really hard and I'm really all in when I like really care about what I'm doing. But if it's something that I don't particularly care about, I really struggle to be all in. And I think it's something I learned on like the experience with the startup in college, is that it is like a lot of, it's just like nights and weekends, and you have to really be all in on the problem, or you're going to be like hating your life. So I was sort of thinking about these things, and I think that was sort of like one track of mine where I was like, I got to find some ideas. And a friend had told me, like, start writing down the problems you see in the world, write down problems every day to think of things to fix. But in a separate world, and this was like completely separate in my head, I was thinking about, working on disinformation, the influence operations, or even how a lot of the botnet and financially motivated crime groups. It was interesting how much like Telegram specifically was being used, and how blatant people are about it, where they're like, they'll post like, here, go join our channel, where it's harder to monitor. And it was thinking OSINT space, because this is separate from Google signals, but if you compare OSINT to something like malware analysis, malware analysis, like we do that, like you said, the recursive unpacking, where you like, now we process it with this. Now if it's a zip file, now we're going to extract the doc inside of it. Now we're going to extract the scripts and the docs. We're going to make signatures off the scripts and the docs in the zip. But with OSINT, it's like really like keyword search. And so it's something I was sort of tracking, where we would, in many cases that you would see where like, there's stuff out there, but the effort that's needed to go into it doesn't make the return worth the investment. So I was thinking about this problem, and it was also another problem I was thinking about is like how cross-platform a lot of this abuse is. And so when you're working on an individual team, like you can see your lens of it, but so many, like the threat actors are really smart. They'll like just share or text each other, or just go to a different platform, and there's always a new platform being made. And so it's like sometimes it's hard to get that perspective of like where do they pop up on the other side when you take them down. And so I was thinking about these problems, and then my co-founder reached out, and he basically said like, I had this idea of like, what if we did something around AI and OSINT? And he got into Y Combinator already. I was a replacement founder there. And
Okay,
so,
nice.
yeah, so then it was just kind of like the perfect fit of like the right people, the right time, the right idea. So then I ended up doing this.
Okay. Okay, beautiful. And then, so in terms of like AI and OSINT, so it sounds like you guys are collecting different types of Telegram channels and stuff like this. So you guys, um, I guess, what are some of the technical challenges that you guys had with doing that, as well as, and like getting into some of those communities versus like some, like I think there's like some communities that are like really open, and then there's other ones that's like you have to like do verification or do additional stuff to do that. So like that I'd like to know about the product side of stuff, but then I also want to explore more about, I also want to talk about the business side of stuff and like how to find clients and how you guys been handling that stuff as well.
Yeah, I think there's so many layers to that because also when we started, and so now, and I think now we do AI for fraud, but actually initially we're like trying to look at like algorithms to understand how like small local events around the world impact the supply chain. So that was our initial starting place of like based on
Like
Russian,
like what kind of supply chains?
like completely not cyber related at all, like just
Okay.
physical supply chains of like when Russia-Ukraine happens, it has this impact to wheat and BMW steering wheels and all this stuff. So that's actually where we started. And
Interesting.
originally
Okay.
it was also like it was one of those things where we were talking about like algorithms to do it, and it was the summer before ChatGPT launched, and I was like, I think there's an AI play, and I love AI, and so that was where we started, and it's sort of in some ways very similar to where we are today, and that we're all we're processing text, you're adding context, you're doing ranking, you're trying to understand why it matters. But that was like the whole, and I'm sort of answering the business side first of that was like it's a whole journey for us of figuring out like we think there's this large scalable option for OSINT here, but where do we start, and what's the most hair on fire problem people have, and like where's the place where we can kind of get that repeatable traction, the repeatable product feedback, and then through that found our way to fraud and cyber threat intelligence, because that's a decision that people make very frequently. But yeah, I guess I've completely lost your first question. Sorry, do you remind me?
Yeah, the first question is like, what kind of technical challenges have you guys had with like collecting the data, storing it, and then running analysis on top of it?
Yeah, that's a super funny question, because I think sometimes like we'll talk to investors and it's almost like there's completely two startups in our problem space. There's one like, can you collect the data? And then the second one is, can you make it relevant? And what we really want to innovate on is that actionability of like, can we really like show you what matters to you? But to play at the table at all, you have to get access. And so that's one, we have a lot of techniques for getting into these spaces, like automated techniques, working with partners, working with security researchers. But it's an interesting point because there's a lot of data that's like available on the surface web, like data that's posted that like provides a lot of context for make it available to threat actors. But then the standard game is like, can you get your, like in some of these closed communities, can you get your account accepted into the channels? Which is the trickier part, to just enter the space so then you can exfiltrate all the data.
Yeah, definitely. And then, yeah, that's super interesting because I know, like, it's my understanding that a lot of the, like, not a lot, but some of the communities are very like, yeah, there has to be some level of verification, or you have to do something to be able to get in. All of these little types of things and stuff. So, okay. And then, so let's say like someone goes to your website and they're like, okay, great, I want to know more about Overwatch and if their solution works for me. Who are some of the people that you guys look for, the ideal customer profile, client profile?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think initially we work in financial services. So that's something we find a lot, is because so a lot of the fraud chatter is about account takeover. It's just various ways of like, can I brute force this account? Can I find a credential leak? Can I take over the account? And I think why it matters more in financial services is because there's money in the account. So and like there's also some other e-commerce plays, like other platforms that are a little bit similar, but that's one of the places that there's such a high volume, and it has real impact to both you're literally losing money, but also that there's the brand and reputational risk there. And so that's I think where we started is looking at it's almost like the inverse of the threat intel problem I used to work on, where this is like super high volume, and like it's not always the most sophisticated techniques. It's a lot of like things like you can take nail polish remover and clean off a check, and then if there's a glitch, you can deposit it and you withdraw money before anyone catches on. And so that's sort of where we found is like our initial customers are in financial services. But I think specifically, like one of the things that we were thinking about is like often people talk about ideal customers as very rigid. They're like, I want to talk to the director, the CISO, this type of company. But another thing we found is that people who are especially like either they're finding that like kind of these out of the box solutions aren't working for them. So people who want something that's a little bit more custom, whether it's like I want certain data extracted, or I want it to report it to me in a different way, or I want to integrate it into my systems. That's something that I think is a lot easier for us to offer now versus some of the incumbents who built like 10 years ago. And so that's something that we also sort of look for, is people who either have like unique asks or a unique vision for how they're building their team. And that's usually been a good fit for us.
That's super interesting. Yeah. Do you guys offer like a managed service part of that as well, or plan to in the future, or do you guys strictly want to stay to productize and then just give it and deliver it to your guys' clients, customers?
Yeah, 100%. We have the amazing, like, they're like geniuses. They're these like dark web investigators. So we'll do that as well. If you want us to just run our own platform and then have our analysts look at the data and tell you what matters. And I think, for us, it's interesting being on the software side, because I think growing up or even college, you hear all these stories where you're like, your system must scale. But I think there's sort of two ways you can do that. You can build a system that scales and runs completely on its own. Or you can build like systems and I think some people build systems to replace humans, but you can also build systems to empower humans and make things more efficient. And that's our take. We're going to make this process like at least 100 times more efficient and effective to find the stuff that matters. And if, we really believe that, then, we were happy to hold both sides of it, as like, if it actually makes an analyst more efficient, then we can make our analysts more efficient. And we're happy to do that.
Beautiful. Is your guys' main target? It sounds like you guys are basically focusing on like financial like leaders and stuff like that. Do you guys also work with government contractors as well, or the government as well, or just are strictly staying towards the financial sector or in private sector?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we really started sort of with the commercial, because we found that it was easier to like get fast feedback, fast iteration, people who will give us this like opinionated feedback on the product. I think it's something we're interested in being dually used long term, but so far still exploring that. Nothing committed yet.
Do you guys like also like monitor like breaches? Because you guys were talking about different types of like accounts that are like reused and stuff like that. So you guys like monitoring breaches and like the X of those breaches and like who's doing what with those?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a really fun one. And it's actually, again, I'm gonna just like go into my spiels on digital agents, but I think it's one of those places where like, so there's some breaches, they're like, this is a breach of my company. And you're like, okay, that's bad. But then you have like multiple questions about that. Like, first of all, like, can you trust it? Because so much of what's posted on these forums is like scam the scammer, or like people are overstating.
Yeah.
So it's always like, it's like, oh, you can't just make decisions based on what you read on the internet or dark web, take your pick. But so I think that's the first question, is like, is it credible? And then there's signals you can look at, like the age of the account. Is it someone who has a reputation of it being real? Like, is it Intel broker? Are they like a high tier on their forum? Do they have credibility? Are there past breaches related to them? And so each of those tiny research questions are a great fit for these little digital agents to go check, like, do they seem credible? And then on the other side, I feel like there's also a lot of breaches that, that may not affect your company directly, but maybe they impact your suppliers or they impact someone in your industry. But if you don't know who this niche company is, you might not be tracking that. And so that's, I feel like, another place where it's really fun looking at the breach data, because you can say like, well, this impacts like a supplier for payment systems in hotels or hospitality. So maybe that impacts you, or this impacts one of your 1,000 vendors that you don't have the time to like monitor for. So that's another interesting space for us of like, how can you innovate on trying to make this breach data a little bit more useful?
Okay. Do you guys also offer the the monitoring part of that to your guys' clients and customers, or do you guys like yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we I think that's a common ask, is like monitoring the breach data as accounts, fraud methods. Also people will want to track like CVEs, threat actors targeting them, but that's like usually a common suite of what we do. But I think based on our origins and sort of where we started on exploring a lot of these different problems, the system is very flexible, so people can track all sorts of crazy things. Like if you want to track price changes or something just completely social.
Price changes?
Well, I guess this is a bad example, but I'm saying, but basically you could set up the three questions we ask are basically like, what data do you want to look at? What insights do you need? And then how do you need it formatted? And that could be anything across like looking at the news for, you could say like crypto shortages, or you could look at social media for people who hate your brand, or people, or like, but usually our core ask is like, look at the fraud and dark web data for people who are attacking us.
Okay, I got it. Nice. And then I guess they take that internally and decide what actionable things that they got to do, or do they also go to you guys and be like, what should we do?
Yeah. I think it's a mix. I feel like it's usually honestly like a back and forth of like, what are the options you can do about it. I think a lot of the teams we work with are they're almost like, they're at this point like getting pretty familiar with this type of data, where they're like, this is If it's something we can either action on and take down, or so sometimes I think with the new tools, that's almost like a mutual brainstorming where like there's this new fraud tool out there, like how do we build something that we can action on? And so that's something where we'll get a little bit more actively involved. But then often I think there's a different categories of like a lot of people will maybe they want to ban specific accounts, but other people, you might try to take the methodology and you try to say like, can we take this new method that we're seeing or indicators of that new method and then use that to like take down a larger like fraud or crime network. And so that's kind of the other angle that usually teams have their systems in place to do that type of stuff internally.
Got it. I want to ask more questions about that, but I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think you guys can share much about that, but that's super interesting. For the investigators that are looking at these different types of things, like what are some of the what's the day-to-day job for them? It's just like, hey, here's the target of information or things that we want to collect on, like write some bots to be able to collect on it, or like just sit there and monitor, like enter into the community, like talk to people and stuff like that, and then make your way in. And then once you're like, as you're going through in that community, then like, post some questions about other types of things. Like how deep does it go?
Yeah, it's honestly all of the above. They're so magical. So there's the first point of like, to your point, like the basics of like, are we in the right data? Like, are we in the right communities? Are we looking everywhere? Should we be looking? Is like the base level of like, because there's kind of the machines and the humans, and like, is the robots, are they collecting the right data? But usually I think some of the more interesting is, so there's sometimes like you look, I feel like they do a mix of like looking for like known knowns and like unknown unknowns, where there's like a standard thing of like what's happening related to our customers, what's happening in these super high value groups. Some certain groups are like associated with hype cycles. So if you can track what they're up to, you might be like saying, okay, like there's a new trend that's coming. And that's sort of like, there's some that's repeatable. And then there's also, I think, a part that like really to me really feels like art, where they just look, and it's because they're so familiar with the chatter and the data, they might see like this new trend and be like, this weird signal is trending. We've never seen it before. And of course, like our robot digital agents aren't like trained to look for that yet, but they can say like, this is something interesting we need to look into. And then they'll also, to what you said, like can do the more engagement stuff of like someone selling some new tool, like what are they selling? Ask them some questions. What are they?
Hey, can I get a demo of it? Can I test it out kind of thing?
Yeah,
and reverse engineer or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've been on obviously YouTube and stuff like that. There's been, I don't know if you've like been seeing any documentaries about letting like the threat actors and doing stuff on the darknet, but the documentaries on these are getting really, really good, where it's like, okay, it was this person, and then how do they get into it? And then they'll follow their like, I say career path, but these kids are like 14, 15, then sim swapping and doing other stuff to their buying like hacked accounts and then draining crypto wallets and stuff like that. But the methodology and the things that they follow is like it's unique and interesting. But those are specifically the threat actors that are like doing this stuff. But then the ones that are like creating the platforms to help facilitate the stuff, that's always, I would say, it's very unique, because it's like, when you're trying to look to, if you're trying to look to see like how like okay, we're like these three websites are going to go down, like what's next? Like I think like this last week or like the week before, like Node went down, like there's literally like a massive like takedowns of recent. So it's like, what's going to happen next? And like what always happens is like there's just a flood to the existing ones, or the people that were like in the same circles, like at least knowing the admins and stuff like that, once they like talk like, okay, dude's been arrested, like then they create, those are the ones that create the next ones or whatever, to try to learn from the other stuff. So it's super, it is very interesting of an investigation and stuff like that, and how you guys look at it in terms of like, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I think both of those topics are super interesting. Like one, like also seeing like how a lot of these groups, especially in the fraud communities, especially in the sim swapping communities, are really young, and that
so young.
Yeah, it's like this is a whole different passion project for me. But I'm like, I think that is like, how do you like set up communities, and how do we like basically disincentivize that? Because it's just like not cool or not interesting at all to be like to dox someone, to swat someone. Like that's not even technically interesting. This is like so how do we like disincentivize people who have like, if you actually have the skills to be like, here, like this is what
I think you're just like fighting nature. Like the nature of the humans is like, okay, you're a 14-year-old kid at home. You haven't like, you barely get in trouble or get grounded. It's like, okay, don't do this one thing. Like they're like, why not? Like I think that's just a hard battle, because I think a lot of, at least for the younger ones, right? If you're talking about the older people, that it's like, you definitely know better. You shouldn't be doing this. Like you should be able to evaluate the valuable things in your life and ramifications that come to it. But yeah, if you're 14 and it's like, okay, I can swim, stop, and this guy's talking
Yeah.
shit to me online, and I'll just remove his account. Like, haha, like, I don't know.
Well, and the other angle I was thinking about, like to your point, is like also the communities. It's crazy to see like how these like the fraud communities and the fraud businesses run, because now there's so many. There's like all the layers of fraud as a service, and I guess we're talking about entrepreneurship, but like some of they're like so good that like they have their marketing done, they have their customer success done, they have their friends that vouch for them, and it's crazy how like also like how many how good also they are at like being welcoming and to new members of their communities. So it's really interesting.
Right. Welcoming. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, in regards to like how they're running these operations and stuff like that, like, some of the DNMs, the direct net marketplaces, having reviews was just like made things like incredibly crazy, because then it's like the Amazon for these types of websites and stuff like that. So when you have that, like, peer of like, oh yeah, this person, this vendor's great, and it's like, well, now they implement all of the same types of business practices that are already implemented in regular businesses, but then you also add the layer onto, okay, now you got to like do threat modeling because you're doing something completely illegal. How do you wash the money or do additional things and stuff like that? And then I think that's just like, it's one of those things where it's like you probably have different types of vendors and those types of like vendors, like other people that specialize in other types of areas, because you can't operate and do everything. So because of the illegal aspect of it, because of all these additional structures and things, just someone will be like, oh, I can do that. Like, I'll service this one person, and then it becomes a bigger thing because they're making a lot of money than you can then charge or something. But
yeah, super. It's interesting, I think, to me on both angles of like how many of them like they don't mind being a thin layer startup. They're like, if it makes them like $10,000 a month as an individual, then like they don't mind.
$1,000 a month is great for a lot of places. Yeah, are you kidding me?
Then it's like you may as well cobble together someone else. Like if you guys build the tool and we'll just run it. But it's super interesting. And then also I think the other thing I find that's kind of cool, or not cool, it's all horrible, but it's interesting to me because they have to prove their credibility without having a real identity. And so they have the handles, and they'll try to put their handles on multiple platforms so that it routes to them. And then they'll try to a lot of times they'll try to provide something of value or try to provide evidence of like a screenshot. And so it's really interesting to me to see how they try to build their credibility when they can't have like a real person be like, yeah, this is legit.
Yeah, I mean, so that's, I know like a certain point in the darknet history, there was a website called Grams, and Grams was like a centralized platform for like private public key pairings and stuff like that associated with all different types of darknet marketplaces and stuff like that. So if you sold on one or two or three of them, you could also put up your key on there, and then it would also like ingress all of the reviews across all the platforms. So then it's like, okay, this person, if they have this key, they've sold like this quantity. But like the entire model just breaks down once an informant like takes over the account, and then everything's like gone to shit or whatever the case is. So it's trust is very difficult in those types of areas and stuff like that. As obviously you're doing illegal stuff, it's probably as it should be.
The person will scam you. That is the whole point.
So at least when it comes to like the amount of like data that you guys are collecting and stuff like that, I imagine it could be a massive amount of data that you would also have to run a bunch of insights on. So like, how do you guys decide? Because you're the CTO, I think it's like, how do you decide on like what data points like we want to collect or not collect, and like especially for our analysis, like we don't need these things to help build models and conduct analysis on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, to some extent, the customers are help a lot, and I think that's one of the interesting things. We try to do it more by configuration, which is especially early on, because we also, with our customers, like it's a sensitive data thing. So like they don't want us to be like training on their inputs. They want us to, like we have to be very careful on how we treat our users' data. But it's interesting on the other part. I think there's certain like high value things that are maybe more interesting or more actionable, and so usually if you can code that into a combination of keywords and embeddings. You can add verification steps to be like, are you sure this is the thing that we're looking for? But it's interesting because even though it's such a fuzzy space, usually our customers are able to articulate like, we want stolen accounts, or we want tools that target us and stuff like that. And then if you're able to translate that into a world of embeddings and like verification steps or ways that you can enrich and add context, can you answer that question? We find that usually it's weirdly like a little bit similar to what I was talking about with the malware or like active learning. As if you can make tiers of systems that like have simple classifiers answer simple questions. We don't need the world's best image classifier to say, is this like an account balance or is this a cat? But then you can like kind of layer them together to sort of get to to what the users want. But so generally it like kind of hits specific buckets, but some of them, some of them will ask for like much more custom things that they're looking for.
Got it. Okay. And then I'd like to hear a little bit about like your guys's, now we talked about the data side. I want to like learn more about the business side of stuff. So I'd love to hear a little bit about like how you guys were in the beginning, like the first year of like developing stuff out and kind of like the growth that you guys had there. And then going on to the second year. So the first year to the second year.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's interesting because I think like in some ways our space, and I'm sure every founder is like, oh, our space is hard. So, but it did feel hard because I think one of the things is that I think is to provide really clear value in a lot of this, you have to have the data, you have to have a lot of the platforms, you have to have a lot of the pieces working. And it was really interesting. So we did Y Combinator initially, and like one of the first, and they have such a good focus of like pushing you to get something out with customers and pushing you to talk to customers. And it was interesting because that was something I wasn't expecting from like working in big tech. Usually like there's you and then there's like 40 layers of people in between you and the actual customer.
All
So
right.
you
Yeah.
look at customer feedback, you're looking at like, well, we have millions of users and like they click on the, like you're looking at statistics, not conversation. And that was the first thing that like our advisor Michael said was like, sorry, like you got to like your number one job right now is go talk to users, figure out what they want. Even before,
Yes.
like, of course you're writing code as well, but like write code at nights, like talk to customers at the end of the day. They'll have you. And it was really a mindset shift because it was also pushing us to like figure out like what are the problems that are so hair on fire that people like will take a bad solution because the current solution is so annoying for them or they don't have a solution. And so first year it was interesting because we didn't exactly pivot, but we didn't pivot because we started like really broad. We're like, well, we have, we want to do something related to collecting OSINT data and making it actionable, but is it for supply chain or is it for dark web and fraud, or is it for like cyber threat data, and trying to figure out like where is the base that we should build on. And so the first year we had some really early pilot customers who are so magical and they have like they know who they are, but they've changed. Obviously, like that's why our business exists, is because we got those early customers who sort of believed in our mission and were willing to take and use early prototypes. And I think one of the things that came out of that is that making sense of the dark web data in a way that's more accessible was like a repeated feedback. We also had another inflection point I thought was like the spring. So about 6 to 9 months into the startup, one of the customers said, like, it was interesting because we gave customers, and this is more on a supply chain use case, we gave customers reports of events that we thought were really interesting and actually did have a pretty big impact to their business. But when they saw the cards and they saw the alerts, they're like, well, I didn't know what to do with this, or I don't know why it matters to me. And that was so impactful to us because it was like if you send the person the alert, it's like anything else in communication. If you don't communicate why this matters, it's your fault. And that emphasis on context, I think, was another really big inflection point for us of like, it's important for us to not only get them the right data and fix the ranking problem, but we have to be able to articulate why this matters or what you could do about it. And so that was another big like kind of inflection. And then, after that, moving into year 2, we really were just doubling down on fraud. I'm starting fraud and cyber intelligence of like, what can we do on these 2 spaces? And then the second year is where we started to get like some more repeatable asks about the different features people want to. And so it's starting to get more into like people want the same thing over and over again. And now it's a repeatable sale.
Nice. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I took the Y Combinator startup class, and it was basically saying like before you build anything, like you got to talk to customers and make sure there's a need or a place for your product, because they said like the death of a lot of startups is they'll build the product and they're like, everybody wants this, why wouldn't they want this? Or what they'll do is they'll take a piece of technology that's new and they're like, oh, this new thing, oh, AI, great. Yeah. Now I'll just make this because somebody, obviously this is a problem. Instead of like talking to people who's like, hey, is this a problem? Would you pay for it? Everything else.
100%.
So they'll spend like months on development and then not actually have anything. So it's really, really interesting that you say that as going from big tech, because like you can easily take for granted, like we already have everyone already wants our stuff. So we get a massive feedback versus like, hey, we want this free thing. People are like, no. It's like, but I'm giving it free. Why don't you want it? Kind of thing. And you have to work with them to be able to say like, what are you interested in? What can we solve and stuff like that? And is that something that you'd want to fix, kind of thing? Yeah.
Which I think is so interesting for me as well. Because I think it was like an adjustment, because you're just not, like, as a technical person, you're used to thinking about like, what's the new innovative stuff we can do? How do we build it really well? How do we build it to scale? But it was interesting thinking like how much kind of that reframe of, and part of it was like, YC was like, think about it as a founder, like what should you be building? And framing that as like, a lot of times, like I think for me is like the most important question I'm asking is like, what should we build next? Not like we can, the how is like a really important question, but the what I think is the part where like if you mess that up as the good news about being the CTO is if you mess that up, you feel the pain where you're like, I just was up all night for weeks and no one wanted it. And so you like have that direct feedback loop of like thinking about like how do you do the sales and the marketing and the product roadmap. It's so core to not only your business but like also your life. So
yeah. You want to develop something. It's like, okay, nobody wanted this, so you have to like double down and be like, are you sure you want this? Like, if we build out this feature, like, are you interested? Are you gonna pay if we build this out? It's like 3 months down the road. Like, it's gonna take some time away from other things, right? So
and learning to ask the questions, because that's the other thing. It's like it's kind of been a journey for me of like trying to figure out like how do you use it? What are your current solutions today? Is this something that you do every week or once a month? And trying to like ask the questions in a better way, because I think that's the other problem I had initially was like, if you ask people if they want it, usually if it's like, if we build this, would you want it? The answer will be yes. Because either they don't want to tell you no, they're trying to be nice, or they're like, oh yeah, features are good. But trying to get to like, out of all of the things, like what is the biggest thing that's keeping you up at night or like making them like a really pain point for them? So that's been like the other part of the journey. But it's also weird because like, I feel like I went through this whole journey, like, oh yeah, like prioritization is really important, or curation, or, that type of thing. But I think about like the software engineering ladder at Google, and like one of the senior things was always like, can you prioritize work? Can you focus on the right project? So it was kind of funny where I felt like went a bit full circle on that.
Yeah, beautiful. It's like you have to ask them like, what's the most emotional like problem, and like try to figure out what is the value in terms of financing money like towards that problem that you want to solve. I then go from there. That's like, I think that's something like every entrepreneur has to figure out, because like if you can't figure that out, which is all sales, right? So you go from technical, but great, now you got to know sales, now you got to know business development, now you have to know all of these other things, and it's like, oh, I thought like I have the cool thing, like obviously you'd want it, right? It's cool, it's new, it's everything. I made it, like, but it's like, yeah, like people are just like, yeah, no, like, why does this matter to me?
Yeah. Well, and I thought that was another thing I feel like I've learned is that like I'm someone who like I've always hated networking. I was like, it made me uncomfortable. Like I was I'm never used to, and so like the concept of like sales and like quote unquote sales sounds awful to me. Of like,
right, that's how you know you're technical. Is if you're super technical, it's like salespeople's like it's just a little bit great.
Wait, but you imagine like Dunder Mifflin like being Michael Scott, like that's like what I imagine. But I was like, I mean, in reality, I feel like it's just like usually it's just like talking to a customer and be like, hey, how's your life? What do you do? What do you care about? And that's like really easy.
I'm interested in talking to you about this one thing, but then like, let me just talk until we get
like and just what is important to them, and then that's actually way easier to just learn what to build, whether they buy or not. You like learn what do people need.
Yeah. Michael Scott's actually a really, really, really interesting example, because he's as the character itself, he's a very, very, very good salesman. He's great at sales. When he's in there, he's doing it, and like every time he's in a sales call, whatever, he kills it. It's just he's terrible at managing. Well, he's just corporately
challenged.
Yeah, that's the word, corporately challenged, I guess, because he's inspiring, but he's takes away. There's so much there, but he's a great salesman. Yeah, that's that. Selling paper industry. The whole paper industry is also brilliant. It's like you picking it like this dying industry, or not one that's adjusted to the internet. Yeah, but okay. Nice. So we've talked about what happened in the first year, second year. What happened in terms of like the team and stuff like that? Did you guys grow, or were you guys still like saying like we'll just keep us two to kind of figure things out as we're going, give maybe 1, 3, 4 people kind of thing as you guys were growing? And then what are you guys looking at now?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we've I'm trying to think when we added people. Well, the first person we added was just like a childhood friend, and she was like she's like brilliant, does some crazy like data science for modeling and like crypto trading and all this stuff. And I knew some of the early data sets we were working with, I knew she had used to find alpha on trading stocks or in crypto. I was like, if you can do that, then it's easier to do whatever we're doing. So she was an early adopter and actually started working with us during our YC batch. Then we grew. We found like front end was next, as I mentioned. Front end is not my strength, and so we found some amazing team members to join us that first year. A lot of them, several of them based out of India. And then I think as we grew, I think we grew again sort of last year. So as we started to hit that, like, okay, now we have a bit more of an ICP of like, this is the type of customer we're going after. And we were able to find a lot of people like who even work in security or have experience either in threat intelligence or in vulnerability like management understanding. And that also is another unlock, was then you get like, as we start doubling down on the use case, having people who are really familiar with those problems and can speak to like, this is like when you're actually like, if you are a person who cares about the latest security research, this is what makes it not able to use something with. So that's where we've been at now. Now we have quite a larger team at the stage, but it's like getting into the third year. It's honestly really fun. I think of course I'm biased, but I feel like the people we work with, like it's such a motivated group of people who are, I think, really excited about like what can they bring to the table and bringing their ideas. And so it's honestly really fun. I think one of the best teams I've ever worked with.
Exactly, and that's where our company, Top Cleared Recruiting, comes in. Finding the right cybersecurity talent with the necessary clearances can be a major hurdle. Did you know that it could take 8 to 15 months on average to hire somebody with a TS SEI plus full polyscope? At Top Cleared Recruiting, we have a network of 1.3 million cleared professionals ranging from C&O developers, reverse engineers, and data scientists. Whether you're working on offensive operations or data analysis, we connect you with the elite talent you need fast. Visit topclearedrecruiting.com and let us help you to find the perfect candidate already cleared and ready to go.
Beautiful. And then as you guys are with YC, have you guys received funding, or are you guys bootstrapping the entire thing?
Yeah, so we raised a round after YC, and we actually can't announce it, but maybe there's another round on
Okay, yeah, excellent. Questions on that. How big is your guys' team currently? And then if there were another round to happen, like how big is the team that you guys were planning to grow out?
Yeah, these are good questions. Honestly, we're still trying to figure some of this out, so maybe we won't commit to that because I think it really depends a lot of like how the next phase of growth goes. I think now we're about somewhere around 10-ish. I'm bad at counting, but something around that. But I think that's, as we grow, I think it depends on a couple of things of like, first of all, it's been shocking how much AI has scaled our productivity. And so it's weird on some of that of like for me as a developer with all the new tools, I write stuff about 10 times faster than I did 2 years ago, which I think is really interesting. So in some ways, like we're getting like a lot more like output from people than we expected. But I also think, probably like somewhere like close to 15 is coming next. But I think it's another question of we're trying to figure out like what are the next directions we like, kind of what do we need next. So we're sort of reassessing until we see that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I guess like with the the decrease of like development time, inversely, it should also be like the decrease of like understanding the problem of the customers and who's interested and stuff like that, like should go down too. And you should picking up more information so that way the company goes in the same growth projection, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, and also interesting because I think there is something. I suspect we will keep growing, but there's something that's like really nice about the stage is like you hear the problem of the customer, and because they're so like it's a small team, so there's not that much coordination that you need to do. You just sort of like it's able to be really nimble, and so I think that's something where I think we're starting to get to the next stage where like maybe we'll start like it's worth like kind of building out some like broader systems, or if we start building out like completely separate sections of the product that might need like a whole new set of people. But that's what we're sort of thinking about at the stage.
Nice. How much like data do you guys like have collected? Like, are you guys like terabytes, petabytes, or even more than that?
Yeah, so we're I guess like sort of a middle, like I don't know, big terms of big data, some medium data. We just somewhere in the millions of records a day, but we have access to a lot more. So we have like larger data, like we don't process all them all because we only find there's small amount of millions of records that we think are the most interesting. So that's sort of more or less what we crunch, and then we try to we do a lot to try to at different stages like whittle that down into what are the ones that are actionable, because that's some things that we see for different customers. Like if you looked at all of the news or all of even the keyword hits on the deep and dark web would be relevant to them, you're getting into like 50 to hundreds of thousands of alerts a day, and people have to review that. So a lot of the art that we're trying to work on is how do you get that to like, here's the top, if you have an hour to review and it'll take you 15 minutes to review every alert, how do we give you the top 5 and try to get them with the context that you can action on them? Or how do we get them integrated with your system so that it's just automatically actioned on if it's high confidence? So that's some of the stuff we're working on there.
Got it. Is this still like a somewhat of a manual process where it's like, okay, we got this many, and then the analyst or someone else has to go in and be like, okay, this guy's crap full of shit. This other one's like very important. We need to like rank them higher, and then the system has to like potentially learn on that, or is it like pretty, or it's smoothing out as you guys are continuing?
Yeah, I think it's actually definitely smoothing out. I think a lot of this, and just like because today's models are so much more powerful, so a lot of these like fuzzy concepts, if you have models that now understand fraud jargon, like you're able to make a lot of these decisions more automated. We do have our analysts like look through in case there's something crazy that we missed, or some like something that we weren't thinking about, or maybe something like we do kind of do a mix of both to like have them be the final check to be like, did the robots do anything completely idiotic this week. But I think it's honestly shocking how well some of like if you think about like even building a ranking or an understanding model, like 5 years ago, you'd have to collect all this data, do the embeddings, train, and now it's like you can get with some like simple configuration on some base models that we have. It works pretty well.
Nice. So are you guys developing your own NLM, or you guys are using base models of other ones that are like easily to integrate, or like building on top of them even?
Yeah, well, it's funny actually because we kind of consider ourselves equal opportunists. We don't like train our own foundation models. That would be too much work, but we do like a lot of like fine tuning. We build a lot of agents, so that's actually one of the things that we're really into is we sort of built a lot of our systems so that you can swap things out because our hypothesis is that the world is continuing to change as fast, so it's really bad to be locked into like if you're just locked into this week's lowly DeepSeek model, then next month you're going to be like archaic. And so one of the things we really try to do is make it very modular, so it's very easy to swap in and out. And then with that, we'll use a mix of like various fine-tuned models, or a lot of times even like doing more agentic approaches of things that have access to tools and they can like respond. Like that also is one of the things that's like pretty core to our business.
Very cool. Very cool. What's on your guys' development path for the next, I guess, for this year? So we're in Q1 now, so for 2025.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think we want to dig a little bit more into enforcement. So like one of the things we're thinking about is a lot of times in threat intel, you give people bad news and then it's kind of their problem to deal with it. We're like, okay, now we have to translate it.
Thanks for paying us. Here's unfortunately this news.
Bad. So I think that's one thing we're trying to get ahead of is like, where can we just like help them action, especially when like because I think a lot of our customers have like they're pretty like ready to go. They're like they know what they want to do next, and so whether that's integrations or extracting the indicators that you need, like that's one theme. Another thing we're thinking of is there's some crazy ideas. I won't pre-launch one of Ryan's projects, but we have some we have a lot of ideas about CVEs and vulnerabilities. We're a little bit torn here because I think honestly it's like messaging apps where we have like 1,000 ways of 10 messaging apps. And so of course the new idea is like let's build the N+1 messaging app. But I think there is some things about even what you were saying about like if LLMs can write a POC for a certain vulnerability, there is some foundational changes to how we can think about like vulnerability analysis, what matters to you, what's the severity, like is this exploited, is it likely to be exploited, who's using it. Sorry, I don't know if you're
fine.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear a cat in the background, but yeah, I think one of our thoughts is like how does this change like vulnerability management. So that's one of the hunches we're exploring. And then I think another big thing for us is just doubling down on these agents of I think we're like sort of just scratching the surface of like what is possible with them. And so if you look at things like operator, how can we build stuff that are like more actively part of doing stuff on the team versus just like telling you bad stuff.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Did you want to feed your cat or take care of your cat for a second, or is you okay?
I'll go 1 second. I'll be right back.
Yeah, sure. Take your time. Figure it out. I edit it.
Okay. Hopefully that's now fixed.
I have a cat. I have a dog. Both of them, they're sleeping right now. They're actually big chilling right now. But they're usually like making a bunch of noise and stuff like that.
Usually you find calm until you start talking and then they want something.
Yeah. All of that always. The CVE and likelihood algorithm, that's super interesting. When I was at Assembly, our entire project was for hospital networks. We would analyze all the devices on there, and then it was my job to take an entire copy of the NVD database and then integrate that into our product to determine if there's any devices that we saw that potentially has CVEs, and then we ran it through our likeliness algorithm to determine which ones are most likely to be exploited. And then I created it. I created all the workaround like scripts or like how they should do a workaround for those types of problems and stuff like that. For the hospital network, it's super interesting because you're not able to update the software on some of the devices. So like you have a CT scanner, spent $10 million running Windows 7 or something. It's like, yeah, you can't update it. Don't do that. It voids the warranty.
Yeah.
What
and
do
in
you
software, like you can't, like you have to go through the staged rollout process to be like very robust on like how you roll out changes.
Exactly. Yeah. So what we did was the solution for the company was reduce the likelihood of exploitation through network segmentation. So we would put it on other part of the network and like make it a little bit easier and stuff. So that was the thing. In terms of like collecting like our data pipelines, we had to tap into the hospital networks, and we just monitored and listened to everything and then determined the devices there, because if you did like a SYN packet and like scanned the entire network, you could take down an insulin pump or something like that that's like connected to somebody. So like it was like super interesting in like how we were collecting the data. But then we also went through the likelihood of like exploitation as well and developed that for our product.
Yeah, that's super. I think it's a super interesting point because I think that's something that I feel like a lot of times, like there's a lot of problems in cybersecurity where you're like, oh, if there's a vulnerability, just patch it. Or if there's like, if you're
why do you have it? Just get rid of it. Like, update. Like,
and the same with two-factor. Everyone's like, well, if you're getting phished, just turn on two-factor. And it's like, well, then there's like these real-world problems where be like, well, if you patch it, you break the bill or you break this production service. And if it's like healthcare, then you can't just have people dying because you pushed out changes. And then even for like two-factor, it's like a lot of users don't want to. And so it's like kind of tricky on how to, can you like actually force? And so then I think it gets into all these interesting problems of like, okay, given that we know we can't do the perfect solution, how do you optimize? How do you like stay on top of and move fast? So if there's some like breaking thing, you know, build productions appropriately. But I think that's honestly one of my, I think a fun part of this field is there's no perfect solution. So you can throw that out the window and then go.
No, there's never a perfect solution. And then whatever solution you have that you think is perfect, you got one other person saying like, we can't do that because of this. And it's like, it could be like, yeah, that's kind of valid. It's like, that's not valid at all. But now I guess that's a decision. But it's funny you mentioned the multi-factor one. There was a company I was working at, and then there was an incident that had happened. I responded to it. I was like, this is definitely not good. We need to contact Microsoft support. We need to like continue with this. And then I brought it over to the C-suite, and I was like, yeah, so this is going on, and it's a small company, but I told them and everything. And then I was like looking at like, I was looking at exactly like how we could prevent this and do different types of stuff. And I was like, yeah, we should definitely set up like multi-factor at least to just kick this off. And like, there was zero pushback. He's like, do it now. Like, I was like, all right, I'm going to message everybody.
Yeah. It's also funny. This is a whole different topic, but I feel like the people who have the personality for incident response is like it's a unique breed of people who are like very calm under pressure and like de-escalate situations.
You find the only way that you really find out how you are under pressure is like you get under pressure in some type of way, and then you see how you react. And like, at least for myself, like there's been instances where it's like this. I think this is like a pretty pressure type situation, but then I'll handle it like I think the word stoic is used too much, but I just kind of like analyze it and think like, okay, what's the most rational, like reasonable thing and logistical thing to do? And it's like, okay, we should do this.
Yeah.
And like, because I always think like, if you're applying, like, I try not to think about like how you feel about it, because it's like, that's not gonna, in most cases, that's not gonna help you. Like, you just, let's worry about the emotion part later. But like, first, let's handle the situation, make sure everyone's safe, everything else is whatever the case is. Then we can assess and like feel about it. I don't know.
Yeah. I had a coworker who I like loved working with. He was so smart. But one of the things he was saying is like, he's actually like, for him, he's like, it's easier during an incident because your priorities are clear. You're like, all I do is, you know, I'm like focused on one thing, like don't make it worse, like stop the bleeding, mitigate, like, and it's interesting. And I was like, that's a really good perspective. And I think actually, like, since he said that, I was like, yeah, I think I kind of relate. It's like when there's a complete disaster or like a complete opportunity, it's almost easier than when you're like in this in between of like doing, you know, some of these things and some of that thing. And
yeah, especially like going back to the sales side of stuff. It's like, hey, you guys interested? It's like, yeah, maybe. And it's like, do I message them now? Do I wait like 10 minutes? Like, what do I do? Like, it's so like questionable where it's like, there's no clear process. Like, okay, here, wait 3 days, then do this. Where it's like, it's kind of like mapped out where it's like, if something's like immediate, it's like, okay, like hopefully you guys have policies or some type of thing to go through, or you're just I've played it in your mind to be like, if this happens, I'm doing, you know, zombies or whatever the case is, like, I'm going to do these things kind of thing.
Well, and it's interesting. I saw some video, I think it was Jeff Bezos, who was saying that like he felt like a lot of stress is about the feeling of like you should be doing something but you're not. And the nice thing, like when there's a disaster, you're doing something, and so you don't have as much of the like, well, should I be doing this other thing, or am I doing the right thing? You're like, yes, I'm doing the right thing, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I think the quote was like, oh man, it's like if you're stressed about something, it's because you haven't like, there's some action that you can take to make the thing better, but you haven't done it yet or something like this. And like, I think one of the things, like, I'm pretty organized for the most part. So like one of my things is like, if I'm stressed or I'm thinking about it, it's probably because it's not on my calendar. So I just need to put on my calendar to do it. And then like, it like kind of like makes me sleep a little bit better at night.
Yeah. I like learned this like therapy years ago, but it's almost like basically if you're stressed about something, like put a time, like this is the time to deal with this problem.
Yeah.
It's such a good idea. I was like, then you just make the time, and then I feel the same way where like suddenly like, okay, this is when I'll be planning. This is when I'm thinking about this.
This is, and then we're transcending outside of business and technology, and this is now going to relationship advice. This is also terrific relationship advice as well, because if you're just like, but you could be at anywhere, but like maybe it's not the best time to talk about or how to handle the issue. And if you can logically say like, okay, let's just take a pause, remove emotions, like let's discuss this at this time because I think it'll be better. And as long as the other person's like on board with it, then you're gonna have a great time. If they're not on board with it, this could be just not a really good indicator in like long-term stuff, because it's like you have to be on the board to be like, okay, let's talk about this at another time or in this area, so that way we can like process it and bring resources to it, because sometimes that is not as critical as it needs to be, like urgent versus important kind of thing.
Well, and it's, I think also like going down the relationship rabbit hole with you, but I feel like it's such a, also like a different reaction. But there's some people who like when there's something going on, they want to like talk about it right now.
Yeah.
Like I need time to think about it, and but that I've learned the same thing of like if you say like let's talk about it later, but at this time it's like not, it's it's now both people are like happy because you're gonna have the conversation, but it's at some future time versus the like let's not talk about this at all, or this isn't important to me, or whatever the deflection is.
Yeah, there's definitely like a fine line between like let's talk about this now, like we need to solve this, versus like like it's important, yes, but is it urgent? Like is the bigger question is like is it gonna like break our relationship if we solve this 5 minutes later? So you always got to be like in the positive affirmation, like if we solve this like next week, is this gonna be a problem? Not like is it gonna break our relationship if we fight about it next week? Then it's like, well, I want to fight now, or so. It's not gonna go well.
Well, and back to startups, I think another thing, and this is like more, I don't know where I saw this video, but someone was saying like in startups, there's so many fires. And basically like you can look at anything and you're like, this is going to be the cause of death in your business. But usually there's also maybe a closer fire that will be a cause of death earlier. And so one of the things that is like to that point of what is it now, like when do you need to worry about this? And like, what is the biggest problem now? What are the things that do have to be solved now? And like, what are the things that are like, you should think about, but like, we'll put time in the calendar in 2 weeks to think about this, like, longer term problem.
Yeah. And then even as you're like talking about like where's the fire, how's it going to destroy the business and stuff like that, I mean maybe you can relate. I haven't actually talked to other entrepreneurs about this, but I'd love to hear your opinion about it. But like sometimes like I'll hear somebody's business or whatever they're doing in their business, and I'm like, oh, you guys should be doing this, or like you should be doing that, and like I have like 100 ideas. I have like really strong opinion and ideas about like how they should be doing it, and then I look at my own business and I'm like, I should maybe do that, and like I get a little bit confused because I think I'm maybe too close to it or something, or like either I'm way too close or I'm way too far. It's one of the two in my own business. But when I see somebody else's, I'm so far that I'm just like, this is exactly what you should be doing, or whatever the case is.
Oh, I completely relate. I mean, I feel like we have certain like advisors that we talk to, and like of course Michael from IC is one of them. But like you meet with him and you just see like it's completely different perspective. Like you'll go into the meeting and we'll be thinking like we have these 3 questions to discuss. And he'll come with something out of left field, and we're like, whoa, we weren't thinking about that. But it's like exactly what you said of like, you're kind of too close to it. But I also think the other element for me is that it's like, it's easy, like finding the right balance of like, because also, as a person working on it, you're like, oh, I don't have time, I'm doing these other things. And finding like the right balance of like, what are the things that you have on your plate that you shouldn't be doing? But there's also like a pretty real aspect, like when you own your own business, sometimes there are just like 5 P0 things, and you have to find a way to do all 5 of them. And so like that aspect is also something that I feel like is like sometimes the answer is prioritize. Sometimes the answer is work more. Sometimes the answer is bring in other people. But I think that's another interesting aspect, is because it's like harder, it's harder to see for yourself that like, oh, we need to start this new project or take on this new initiative.
Yeah, definitely. When and especially like at least from the technical side of stuff, where it's like, okay, like what are we gonna do? We got to build this thing out. We got to do this, and then you got to sit down at the desk and be like, okay, like now it's time to build some stuff and like actually like get my hands dirty and stuff like that. That can be a lot of fun. As like sometimes it's like I got in a meeting, or like we're deciding on initiatives, which is still exciting, but I think there's still a massive amount of joy when you're creating something or building something or utilizing your skill set that you're good at when you're doing the thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny because I mean I think a lot of times I'm like more on calls, doing more like design discussions, or a lot of my days are spent with chatting to other people, which I actually do love. I actually find it's super fun, especially seeing our team like do incredible stuff that I would have never thought of. I love that part of my job. But to your point, like I grew up coding, and this is like a really weird, strange thing to say, but like it's really relaxing for me. It's like Some people think like organizing their house. To me, like you're just like moving things around. You're taking your ideas and writing them. And so it is funny for me. Like sometimes like even if the weekend's free, I'll find times to like just do that because it weirdly gives me energy in some strange.
It's satisfying. It's really satisfying. Like it's one of those things. Like I've noticed this about my own. Now we're just talking about like personal like enjoyment. At least I'm like I've noticed that like if I'm like sad, depressed, or like not feeling too good about myself in some type of capacity, I realize like my biggest like way to like get out of that is actually accomplishing something. Like it could be really small, but obviously the bigger ones are more rewarding if I put more effort into it. But like sometimes like I'm so down on myself, I'm like I just need like a little bit of win. So I like do a little bit. And I don't feel better, and then I'll do a little bit bigger one. But especially like if you know, in terms of like doing something technical or programming, whether it's like looking at vulnerabilities, or looking for vulnerabilities, exploiting them, or even like building something where it's like I could like I have all of this data. How do I do something with this data to make it into this other thing that I can make a use case out of it? And like just building the thing and like it's just sucking. Like I'm like building it out. I'm like, oh, error, bug. And then like as you incrementally decrease, or I guess like decrement the amount of like difficult bugs, and it's like going and it's running, and you're just like staring at it, making sure it stopped breaking, and and just have it go. It's like, okay, it's still working, and then you feel pretty good about yourself.
Yeah, no, I love. Well, and something I was also thinking about was, I feel like a lot of times burnout, like there's different types of burnout for me. Like sometimes you're just straight working, you need to like go have a life and talk to people. But I think there's a lot of times, like for me, sometimes like when I feel the most stressed or burnt out, it's like when you feel like you don't have momentum, and finding, and that's something I noticed, like to what you said is that, and it can be in all sorts of lives, like if you know parts of life, but finding those like little wins that like sort of build that cadence of wins, so you like feel like, oh yeah, I'm accomplishing stuff, is amazing. And it's also fun. I think sometimes I notice that like some of the best ideas we've had as a company have come from like the times where like we did like a 2-week no meetings, like do work on whenever you want over the holidays, and like some of the ideas that we have this year just came from that. And like having those dedicated times of like, okay, like let's take the pressure off, let's take the sprint planning off, and just see like what do people do for fun. And it's honestly like so much more creative than our normal ideas.
Nice. I want to hear, because like whenever I'm like building something out or working with another co-founder on something, I'm always I also have like a billion ideas, and I'm just like, hey, like what do you think about this? And like, do you guys have that conversation with your co-founder, or do you feel like it's more relaxed? I always feel like maybe I'm just overloading people with too much information and questions or ideas and stuff, and then they're like, no, yeses, which I've heard like. You have like one co-founder is like the visionary that have a bunch of ideas, and the other person's more of an integrator that actually like creates and builds it out. Do you feel like you're one or two or the other, or both of them, or how does that communication go back and forth with you or co-founder?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we're kind of both the same. I think like honestly, maybe regrettably, usually I'm more of I'm like, well, like we can't build all of them, so usually I'm actually more of the integrator person recently. Yeah. But I actually think our company in general is a lot of ideas people. And it's interesting because I think people get a lot of enjoyment about like imagining what's next. Of like, we're here, but like, what if, and so it's funny, we have like this like future ideas channel, and we'll track these ideas. And we always have like way more things that we could build than we're, have any chance of actually building.
Yeah.
But it's really fun. And I think I don't know, I think it gives us a lot of energy. And then you like start to line up where you're like, okay, the customer asks, like we had 2 people ask for this.
Yeah.
Now it's starting to get like moved to the roadmap or get some resources behind it. But yeah, it's I think especially in our space, because there's like so much data problems, there's so many agentic workflows we can build. It's one of the like both beautiful and complex things of like, well, we have way more ideas than we have time to build in our lifetime.
Nice. Yeah, that's super fun. Okay, great. I think wrapping up, I kind of want to know a little bit more about where you guys are headed now, and what's the future look like for you guys. And
yeah, it's a good point. I think it's a really exciting year for us because I think we're launching a lot of these initiatives around tracking like IOCs, tracking threat actors, and like moving more into that vulnerability space. So I think that's one of the things that we're really excited about is like that's just a job. There's a lot of volume, and so how do we kind of innovate there? So I think that's one of the things we're really excited about. I also think, the other big thing that we're thinking about this year is about these enforcement tools of like, what does the future of like fraud agents look like? Both if you think about things like more on the red teaming side, can you imagine people like trying out like some of the tactics that they're sharing? That has a lot of complications of like, how do you do that in a safe environment? Can you look at the other side? Like how can we build, now that we're getting closer to getting high signal data to our customers. Like, how do we start building, like, improving their workflows, improving how they can leverage these agents? So I think we're really excited about these kind of, now that some of the groundwork has been set on like the base level of agents, like how can we extend that either to go like much deeper into being more helpful in people's workflows, or to start on in this newer field for us of like getting more into the vulnerability side.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know why I didn't think to say this earlier. That didn't cross my mind. But you guys are talking about different types of fraud detection and stuff like that. And like, I think there was like I say recent. Everything feels recent because a lot of news over how stuff has been happening. But I think in the past like month or two, somebody like they tried to use like deepfake to like they contacted like at a estate of some lady and like tried to act like this old lady to like create this will basically to say that she's like trying to add somebody to the will or whatever the case is. So the law firm like did a video call and it looked like the person looked like they were fake. Luckily there was like younger people on there to be able to catch this and look this. But I feel like if you're like an older law firm, you're like, okay, they're there, like it's fine. So fraud around like faking videos and stuff like that, I think is going to be crazy in terms of like different types of issues and just like already faking voices is also becoming relatively more easier. I just don't think it's been seen as much as other types of things, but I think video is going to be one of them.
I'm so passionate about there's a whole other rabbit hole, so I'll try to like cut myself off, but I think,
no, please, let's go down a rabbit hole if you get the time. Like I'm all about them.
I think the one thing is there's such a gap, and I feel like most traditional like phishing and scams are like sort of detectable, but you still see the gap of like people who maybe grew up with internet chatter, or people who like had social media growing up and people who didn't, and you see a lot of those traditionally target vulnerable populations, and then you see these scams and I'm like, quality of phishing is getting so much better, so that I'm like, and it's like, and it does I think change the paradigm of like what happens when like the videos are, you know, for all sorts of things like selling supplements or selling, you know, there's more like transfer scams as well.
Thank you so much for your time, Zara. I really appreciate you jumping on the call and speaking to us to Hackers to Founders Day, and we hope the best for you and Overwatch.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a super interesting conversation. I'll have to stay tuned for your next episodes.
Yeah, that would be terrific. All right. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.
Cheers.